My name is Benton Stokes. I'm a former fundamentalist, post-evangelical worship leader, and songwriter. I enjoy wry Manhattans, roller coasters, and road trips, just not all at the same time.
I'm Elaine O'Rourke, and I'm a teacher, an author, and a spiritual coach. I was a philosophy professor and a liberal pastor in a couple of former lives, and these days, I love aha moments and not-so-dry martinis.
We have conversations about life and God with a queer perspective, over cocktails, like you. This is Cocktail Theology. So today we are sipping on a gin elderflower fizz.
Actually, you're sipping, I'm gulping.
Well, that's fair.
Okay, carry on. You were going to say something to our people.
I was just going to say that's what we're drinking. It is 2 parts gin, 1 part Saint Germain, which is a elderflower liqueur. It has some lemon juice, and it's topped off with just a tiny bit of sparkly water. Yeah. Now, in our case, I used Topo Chico in mine, and I used Fever Tree elderflower tonic water in yours. And because you let me taste yours, they don't really taste that different. The recipe doesn't call for it to be shaken with ice or to be served with ice. So I put the gin in the freezer, and I put the soda water in the fridge just to cool everything down.
Yeah.
But I think you could just as easily pour this over ice and add either, a little more soda water, or you could also add some muddled mint or basil in here, and it'd be really good.
Basil or mint would be phenomenal. Actually, Thai basil would be really, really perfect. Yeah. I think just adding the extra bubble would just simply change the character of it. But but that combination of gin and especially just the basic London Dry that you used, it's just awesome.
It's really good.
Yeah. So refer back to gulping versus sipping.
Right.
So it occurred to me not too long ago, I was listening to one of our episodes, and it occurred to me that we don't talk about being queer much.
No, I don't think we do.
So why do you think
why
do you think that
why
is?
Is that? So why? Why is that?
I think because I've been thinking about this, and I think for me, it is just such a part of who I am, and I've never had to fight for that at all, really.
Yeah.
I was ordained in the United Methodist Church. And the United Methodist Church has had, depending on which week you're talking, a policy against the ordination of LGBTQ people. And so during that whole ordination process, I did not discuss it. Now, it would have been pretty easy to discover this.
Yeah.
But I didn't discuss it because why fight that specific battle?
Right.
Now, I fought the battle with them, but I did it in a much more general way, right? Rather than saying, hi, me, But really, other than that, it's been sort of a non-issue for me. My first romantic involvement was with a woman, and the next one was with a guy, and the next one was with a woman. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's been one of those things that it's who I am.
Yeah.
Also, I grew up in a church where it was a non-issue because one did not speak about one's sexuality
right. or
or one's politics or really one's anything that went beyond what was decorum. So, so you could do pretty much anything, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't grow up with that particular sense of either I would be cast out or God would feel differently about me. I think that I always knew God knows everything about me before I do. So I'm still here. No smiting has happened. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then I was conscious as a kid of the exclusivity that was taught in some of the Sunday schools of my friends.
Right.
And I remember being really appalled.
Yeah.
But as a result, for me, I have to remember that it is a real and living, good, bad, indifferent thing for people.
It is.
Right? So it is, yeah. So what about for you? Why do you think we don't talk about queer much?
My coming out has been a very slow dribble. It started pretty darn close to 20 years ago. I mean, there was plenty of self-discovery and a lot of self-loathing, too, before all of that.
Right.
But I think dealing with it out in the open probably has only happened in about the last 15 or so years for me. I tend to be a fairly private person, so it's not something that I felt the drive or desire to shout from the mountaintops once I kind of made my peace with parts of it that I had been uncomfortable with.
Right, because you're not going to shout anything from the mountaintops.
No,
Right.
no, it's not. It's just not my style. So it is something that I have come to terms with, and I don't mean that in the negative sense that I had to come to terms with it, but more like this is all a part of who I am.
Right.
And so I'm integrating this. I'm choosing to integrate all of this that I know about myself into everything about myself, if that makes sense. So
Of course it makes sense.
it's learning how to reconcile faith with sexuality, with family, with
Right.
long-standing relationships, with a career that was in Christian music at one point, with, how do I navigate the world now as a man who identifies as gay?
Right.
So it was a very long process of awakenings, just little awakenings, little, here and there noticing things about myself.
Right.
So I've never been one to make a big coming out statement.
Right.
All my coming outs have been in conversations privately with people.
Right.
I've never posted anything on Instagram. I've never posted anything on Facebook that screams I'm gay.
Right.
Now, like you, even though maybe I choose not to talk about it because it doesn't seem relevant to what's being discussed, I also don't shy away from it. And at this point in my life, like you said, it's very easy to go online and know, even just from this podcast, that I'm gay and that I'm Christian. So I think the need to talk about it hasn't been there. Now, are there advantages to talking about it? Yes.
Yeah,
for myself, but definitely for other people.
For sure.
And so I think that's the thing that I'm trying to learn how to do better.
Right.
Is how to talk about my faith as a gay Christian.
Right.
Because I believe that helps other people who feel outside, whether
Yes.
it's because of their sexuality or some other reason.
Yes.
And coming from an evangelical background, as I did, it was definitely something that was not accepted in our church. Wasn't accepted in any of the churches that I was a part of before 2008. So fortunately, almost immediately, when my wife and I separated, an opportunity opened up for me to lead worship as an openly gay man in an evangelical context at a church that accepts gay people.
Right.
And I give all credit to God for that, because that just doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't.
And at the time, I was already grieving the idea that I wasn't going to be able to be in church anymore.
Right.
And so that God provided me that outlet and also a safe place for me to explore what is my relationship going to be with God now.
Right.
I do recognize my sexuality and my faith, and they are no longer at conflict. They haven't been in conflict for years.
Right.
And I know how remarkable that is, at least for many people who are on the outside of that struggle, saying, how in the hell am I ever going to get to a place where I feel like God's okay with me?
Right.
So I know there is much worth and value in me sharing my story.
For sure.
And I do struggle with how to do that sometimes.
For sure. So let's stay on the sharing of the story part, and then we'll go back to the religious faith piece, if that's okay.
That's great.
So when I decided to go to seminary, I was living in mostly queer community. I was involved with a woman, marched in pride marches and had my picture in the paper as a lesbian avenger, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because that's who I am. When I decided to go to seminary, though, and the seminary I went to was perfectly happy to guide me into how to handle the Methodists.
Did they give you a handbook?
Yeah.
Like,
wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah, that would have been great.
Here, we're fine, but others aren't. Here you go. That'd be really funny. But when I decided to go to seminary, I pretty much lost my friend group. And I understood it intellectually at the time, that people who have been hurt by Christianity or by any religion or any institution, period, when someone they think they know decides to do something more in that direction, it is terrifying.
yes.
And you feel betrayed,
Yeah.
right? I experienced it more like F you, right? We reject you, we shun you, right? Which I think is more like the kind of experience you're talking about, being worried about as you were coming out, right?
Yes.
So it's like I was more like a queer person coming out as Christian.
Yes,
right?
right. Which is a real thing.
It's a real thing. And facing that part,
yes,
right? Where
right.
all of the people I was connected with sort of went, okay, you're not trustworthy, you're dangerous, whatever. And having been bi all my life, there was always that. Like, men thought it was cool and women were terrified, right?
Right.
But, anyway, we can go on about that another time. But I do think that there is that sense that is deeply human, deeply tribal, of when you don't understand something, or it feels like a threat to your group, your gut is to cast out rather than welcome in. So there's something to me about that whole, I guess it's kind of tribal, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like where if you're part of one tribe and it looks like you might also want to be part of another tribe, then people don't know, they don't, like our gut reaction is to shun you. Yes. Because it feels dangerous somehow.
Right.
Now, in some cases it isn't, and we just feel that way. You know, it's just like, but you're my friend. But in other cases, it is. You will lose something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think in the sexuality plus minus versus Christianity or evangelicalism in particular, I think that is a very real danger. I know that I knew that if I came out and didn't leave of my own accord, that they would gently or maybe not so gently say, we can't allow you to be as involved as you've been. If you want to continue to attend, they would say that was fine. But obviously that's not what I wanted. Mm-hmm. And I definitely wasn't going to settle for that. And I also didn't want all of the conjecture that comes and all the conversations that happen.
Right.
Wow, did you hear about Benton? And right. So it was much easier for me. Plus, my marriage was ending, so it was a very natural progression for me to leave right. a lot of those circles. And I had already begun working my way out of Christian music right. sometime before that right. because I no longer felt like the lyrics that I was writing or the music that I was writing to other people's lyrics supported my own view of God and right. my own way of approaching life. Sure. And that's even apart from my sexuality. And I'm sure my sexuality informed that, but I really think that I was just evolving into a more progressive Christian during that whole time right. and didn't know what to call it, didn't know why even. Mm-hmm. I was being challenged by some of these things that I was being confronted with, even just in writing sessions and songs that I was a part of, that sure. I no longer felt comfortable being a part of. Yeah. So for me, I think it was maybe an accelerated exit mm-hmm. because of my divorce. Mm-hmm. It made it mm-hmm. maybe easier for me to exit some of that under the auspices of, I'm getting a divorce, which, divorce is something that's frowned upon in many evangelical churches too. So
basically you were just flipping the bird to that church.
I left and right. So it was just like, it's time for me to go. Right. And again, fortunately, I found a soft place to land. Right. Not everybody does. No. And so, when you're talking about trying to reconcile or even just coexist in two different worlds, church and queerness, mm-hmm. or church and anything that evangelicals just don't like. Right. It's an incredibly challenging place to be. And I know, I don't mean to just rag on evangelicals this season, but wow, there's just so much to talk about because right. our culture is changing at breakneck speed. Yes. The acceptance that our queer friends and neighbors and ourselves are feeling in the world at large is warmer and greater than it's ever been. Right. In almost every circle. Right. Except for the evangelicals who are trying to take over America with their agenda. Right. It's hard to not give them some grief over that. Yeah. Because honestly, I know we both agree on this. What they're doing is not Jesus. It's not
No.
biblical. It's
not
not
Jesus-y.
kind or loving, or it's none of the things that Jesus asks us as his followers to do or be.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay and it's fair for us to criticize that and say, look, that's not what Jesus calls us as Jesus followers to be.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, and if we have listeners who were in more conservative circles than we tend to run in, if listeners, I'm going to talk directly to you as if you exist. If you have critiques of our being Jesus followers that are not simply, it's wrong, I would love to hear them. I would actually really like to hear what you're hearing, what you're thinking, how you're feeling about that. Mm-hmm. There's something about us being complex, layered creatures that makes us very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's partly about that. It's partly about code switching, which of course African Americans, immigrants, people who really literally walk in two different worlds have to do. So it's partly about that. But it's also partly, I think, about even if we name ourselves as, hi, I'm Elane, I am this. The idea that those intersect is it's just tricky mentally. Even if emotionally you're fine with it, which I think a lot of us aren't, but even if you are, it's like, okay, what do I do with all of that?
Yeah.
One of the advantages to thinking of yourself as a Jesus follower, if you are one, is it becomes about that relationship with you and Jesus rather than about your identity as part of a group. That's helpful.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
So if I think of myself as a person who, rather than as a blank person, that makes a difference.
Yeah.
When we were talking about, for our book, the devotional book that talks about misfit Christian, right? That's the title of it. We went back and forth for a while about whether it should be Christian misfit or misfit Christian.
Yes, we
right.
did.
Like, what's the thing that is the divergence, whatever the thing is, and how you think about that stuff really matters. And I'm not in any way diminishing the amount of pain one feels leaving one's tribe or one's people or the fear. I'm not diminishing any of that. But as a separate part of our individual paths, and the fact that those things are fluid, right?
Yeah.
Like today, I may feel more like may be more centered in my woman identity because of something I heard or because I'm pissed off about politics or whatever than I am in my, Jesus follower identity in terms of what I'm going to feel like pissy about.
Sure.
Or happy about, whichever the thing is.
Right.
That sense of identity, it's not as simple as we want it to be.
No, it's really not. And, as you're talking about this, it brings to mind once my marriage was over and I began sort of reconstructing, because my faith went through a pretty serious deconstruction. There were bits and pieces that I held to, very, very tightly. But a lot of things I was willing to say, we'll come back to that later. And some of those things I haven't come back to yet. Right. And I feel okay about that. But, I think during that period, it wasn't just my faith that was being rebuilt.
Yes.
It was other identity pieces of me that I had lost because I was hiding so much.
Yes.
So my love for roller coasters, my love for comic book, all the geeky things that I loved as a kid when I felt uninhibited, when I didn't feel like I had to live up to anybody's expectations or anybody's norms. I could just be myself and immerse myself in all these, silly, crazy things that I enjoy still to this day. I think I felt the freedom to experience all of that because I had shoved so much of it just down because it didn't jive with being a heteronormative, cisgendered husband, father, Baptist, etc.
Right.
And so once I no longer had those titles stuck to me like a sticky note on my forehead, I could get past some of that stuff and actually start to enjoy the things that I've always enjoyed.
Right. Right.
And by enjoy, I mean find joy in.
Right. Yeah. No, it is about finding joy in and forgive me, but it's also about kind of accepting that you're a nerd.
Yeah.
In some certain ways, right? And in that particular world you were in, nerdiness is not acceptable either.
Right.
Right? That's great. I love that image. I hope our listeners find that helpful too.
Yeah.
That as you're trying to figure this out, you may discover all kinds of things that you realize that you kind of set aside because you couldn't figure out how to fit it into the picture.
Right. And for me, I think it was beginning to understand that God loved and accepted me as a gay man also meant that God loved and accepted me as, a middle-aged roller coaster fanatic, or, all the other quirky things about myself that I felt weird about, I no longer had to feel weird about.
Right. Isn't that lovely?
It's really amazing.
That's the thing I always hope for people, honestly, in whatever path they're on.
Yeah.
Is that we all come to that understanding that if we believe in a God who's at all cognizant of anything, God knows all of this stuff. And it's just kind of saying, I'm just waiting.
Yeah.
Just eventually you're gonna realize that I already knew this and be cool.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Just like be cool.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
How are you treating other people? I mean, that's the part that God gets like ticky about in pretty much every sacred text.
Yeah.
It's how are you treating other people?
Yeah.
So I think one of the things you're pointing to is that by learning that by accepting that you are a complex human being, accepting that God already knows that you're a complex human being, it allows you to explore complexities that you've like tucked away because they felt not wrong exactly, but not right.
Yeah, they really just didn't fit who I thought I was supposed to be, or they didn't fit the norm of these particular groups that I was in. There was a very distinct identity that I thought I was supposed to have.
Yes.
And yet, because it wasn't my true identity, there was always this dissonance of, I have to shove this down, or I have to hide this part, or I have to, and then all of a sudden things that aren't subversive feel subversive.
Right. Oh, that's brilliant. No, you're exactly right. Yeah.
And so there were all these things that I felt were subversive, and actually, in truth, none of them were subversive, and because God already knew, and God already loved and accepted me, in spite of, and sometimes because of all of those things, I was the one that was getting tripped up over it. It wasn't God.
Exactly. So not to minimize the fear of loss that people have about accepting who they are or choosing different paths, or not to minimize any of that.
Right, of course.
But so much of it is understanding that we are complex, creative, created, amazing, unique, etc. people.
Yeah.
And that God already is there with us.
Yeah.
It lightens at least one tiny little load of that if you know that you've got someone in your corner who really is just waiting for you to be embraced and be loved.
Absolutely. Listeners, we love hearing from you. We would love to hear your stories. If you are queer or otherwise outside, whatever that means for you, we would love to hear from you and your experiences of being a person of faith while also being blank. And what that has meant for you, the good stuff and the bad stuff. Your experience may be sharply divergent from mine or from Elaine's, and that's okay.
For sure.
But we want to hear all of it, and we also are happy to try our best to answer any questions you have and help you navigate whatever it is you're navigating right now. Because I know that it can be an incredibly difficult change of path to begin to understand kind of who you are and who you are in God's eyes.
Yes.
And how maybe the choices you've made up until now have put you in a life that doesn't feel true or right. And you shouldn't feel bad about making those choices. We do the best we can when we have to make a choice. But now if you find yourself in a different place, there are ways to move through it. You're not going to get out of it. You're not going to go around it. You're going to have to go through it. But there are ways to move through it, and we would love to help. Cocktail Theology is where we are.
Yep.
And please reach out to us anytime.
Absolutely. So did you say there's more of this stuff?
We will definitely make more of this gin elderberry. Elderberry?
Elderflower.
Elderflower.
Okay, so we'll make more for me and not so much for you.
I've barely even touched mine.
Okay, so you were already giddy coming in. Very good. All right. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Bye.
Funny how the view can change, how life just seems to rearrange itself, no matter what it was. I don't know how it goes, but look, moving on feels pretty good. Moving on feels pretty good.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like and hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. We welcome your comments, questions, and ideas for conversations and for cocktails. Please get in touch with us at our website, cocktailtheology.com. Cocktail Theology is a production of SFS. Our theme song is Moving On Feels Pretty Good, recorded by yours truly, Benton Stokes. You can find my music wherever you stream your favorite artists. Join us next Thursday for another new episode.